Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Steve Isherwood. I'm Chief Executive of the Institute of Student Employers, and welcome to this morning's webinar. This is our first webinar that we've done specifically for schools careers advisors. I'll give you a bit of rundown in terms of sort of how these things work in a couple of secs. But first of all, I'd like to introduce our Chief Research Officer, Tristram Hooley. Tristram, would you like to say hello?
Hi there. Yes, looking forward to talking to people today and giving a bit of update on some of the data that we've got.
Fantastic. So just a little bit around the ISE and how our sort of we do a regular series of webinars that you'll be able to access. We normally do them round about lunchtime, but as this audience is for those of you based in schools, it was a bit of a tricky slot to try and find a time that would work for everybody. And I think we realised there isn't a perfect time, so that's why we started at 8:30 in the morning before the school day really kicks off. But of course, we put our webinars onto our video platform afterwards. You'll get a link after this, everybody who registered, so you'll be able to watch this afterwards and catch up. So please do that, and also please feel free to share the recording with colleagues and people in other schools that you may know. We now have over 70 schools that are ISE members, and this was a deliberate action on our part early this year, where we made membership free for schools, and that's for two reasons really. The first and most important is that the employers we work with very much look at early talent in the round. As I'm sure most of you know, it's not just about graduate recruitment. All the large employers also look at apprentice recruitment, school leaver program, etc., etc. It's not as focused as much on graduates as it was when I started in this game 20 years ago. The apprentice levy is part of that. That has fueled this, but there was this general direction of travel. So the ISE used to be called the AGR Association of Graduate Recruiters, focused on graduates. We've been around for about 50 years, but over the last sort of 10 years, we have expanded our focus, and this is part of that activity. We also realised, although we've had a few schools that are members over the last few years, of course, the practicalities of budgets, tight resources, we recognise that actually that's a really big issue, particularly for schools. So we didn't want the membership fee to be a barrier to schools. So this will be the first of many actual specific tools that we will push in your direction. So if I just click my slide onto next, let me just talk a little bit around actually some of the resources that you can use. So if you go online to our website, you should have login details now. The Knowledge Hub is the place where we put most of our information. So every week we have additional webinars, we have podcasts that might get recorded, they go onto the Knowledge Hub, but also a steady stream of blogs, research, data, a whole bunch of stuff that Tristram is constantly churning out, and that will give you a whole range of information. It will give you labour market intelligence in terms of what's happening with jobs, vacancies, etc. It will also give you a really good insight into how employers are managing their early talent activities, how they attract candidates, the kind of selection processes they use, and it will really keep you up to date with everything that's happening and current in our industry. So I really would recommend that you use that. You should get from us 2 emails a week, one on a Tuesday, which is Engage, which is all about our upcoming events, then one on Thursday, Insight, which is about the latest content that's coming out. So please do keep a regular look on that website. And within that Knowledge Hub, you'll see the Apprentice School Leaver section. We do have a section specifically dedicated to everything that's to do with apprentice and school leaver, both recruitment and attraction, but also the development, the training side, what actually happens when students join organisations. I guess the lifespan that we cover isn't just about the recruitment piece. It is very much around outreach, it's around attraction activities that happens, before people join, well before people join, but also our work extends into what happens when people actually do join. We've got a very thriving development community. So really, I guess our remit ends once somebody's successfully in a business, they've completed their training program, and they're a fully fledged employee. Then that will vary, of course, depending on industry to industry. So that's enough about the ISE. If you've got any questions on that, please do drop us a line. We're more than happy to go through that in a bit more detail. A bit of an agenda of what we're going to cover this morning. Very shortly, I'm going to hand over to Tristram. So Tristram's going to talk about, the COVID context, what's happening in the market at the moment, then also what is happening about the jobs market. I mean, that's the thing that most people, of course, are very keen on understanding. We've got lots of up-to-date data on that. Tristram will then hand back to me, and then I'll be talking about actually what is it the skills that employers want? What are they really looking for? And then a little bit around actually how employers go about that recruitment activity, and also how that recruitment activity has changed as a result of the pandemic. Please use the GoToMeetings webinar platform that we've got. If you've got any questions for Tristram and I as we go through, please do populate that questions box. We have left time at the end to cover questions, so please don't be shy. Please hold back. We want to make this as interactive as possible at the end of it. So yeah, please chuck your questions, anything that comes to mind as we go through the presentation, and Tristram and I will deal with those at the end. That's enough for me. I think it's time we got into the detail of the session. So Tristram, over to you.
Yeah, okay. So let's start by talking a bit about COVID, which still sadly is kind of an important context for what's going on, really. So yeah, if we kind of go on to the next slide. Yeah, so what I've done here is I've looked at the number of COVID cases that we're seeing daily, both internationally. So the top one, the black one, is global, and the bottom one is the UK picture, and I've put them over the same time zone, so you can kind of see where we are. I suppose why I do this is, firstly, I think the international picture shows you that although we've just gone over a recent peak internationally, and that's where we heard about all the terrible things that are going on in India and so on, and we are on the downside of that, which is really encouraging. It's very far from over, and if you look at the level internationally, there's still a lot of cases. In the UK, I think we were all feeling a little bit like we might be past it, but if you look at the end of that chart, you can see the numbers are starting to go up again, and rather worryingly, they were over 7,000 yesterday. So whether this is going to be the most important thing this year is as it was last year in terms of shaping the graduate market, I'm not sure. I hope not, but I think it is still definitely a relevant and ongoing context that we need to understand in relation to what's happening in the market. So if we go on to the next slide. Yeah, so the kind of deadline is that for government to make decisions, and for hopefully, we were sort of told that COVID would effectively be over by the 21st of June and we could all go out and start night clubbing again. But it's looking, I think, a bit less likely than that. But from our point of view, I think that date is important because it sends quite a strong signal to the labour market. And so how employers are feeling, I think, will be changed by what decision is made on the 21st of June. And if we go on to the next slide, we can see what Rishi Sunak's just said on this. So Sunak has kind of put out a press release saying that he will accept a 4-week delay to ending restrictions in England. And so, while the government haven't definitely made a decision yet, given the direction the figures are going in, given the fact that Sunak has been one of the kind of main opponents really of a lot of the lockdown restrictions, and has always been kind of pushing this idea that, well, let the economy go, even if we get some people get COVID. The fact that he's on side seems to me quite likely that we are going to see lockdown restrictions extended, if not tightened. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we're looking at all the time, and we're not primarily interested in reviewing all the politics of it, but the politics will make a difference and will shape how employers are feeling, how the labour market's going, and also some of the things around how universities and other post-secondary organisations are planning to handle things. So, for example, we're getting a pretty strong message that most universities are going to keep an awful lot of their teaching online next year. Now, they're going to have students back on campus, that's the plan. They're going to do small group teaching, but lecture halls and things like that are unlikely to go ahead in many universities next year, or at least that's the current plan. And for us, with our kind of ISE hat on, that's important because it also means that some of the careers activities that happen in universities normally are likely to be quite disrupted. And we're talking to employers about that and to universities as well. So anyway, if we go on to the next slide, I'll just point out that we run a regular bulletin which looks at COVID. Now we've now done 55 of them. I was sort of hoping that we were coming to the end of that, but I think we may well carry on doing it through the summer at least. And we update on the numbers and so on for the COVID, but we also pull together all the information about labour market issues, about education, and about student employment that's been published over the last couple of weeks. We're currently doing these bi-weekly, but we've kind of adjusted that up and down depending on how much news there is on this issue. But anyway, we'll move on from COVID, but unfortunately it will come up in all the other sections of this presentation, and we'll go on to look a bit at the jobs outlook. So the jobs outlook it's really complicated, right? And there's a lot of different signals here. So this is the big picture. So this is OECD unemployment data, and what you can see is the United Kingdom basically has followed the same pattern as everywhere else, that we had a big rise in unemployment during the beginning of COVID, and then that's kind of started to tail off, and I'll look at some of the tailing off in a second. But if we click just again, then one of the things that we've found is that the impact of a crisis is not always immediate. So if you look at the previous crisis, the 2000 which is, so the beginning of this chart is 2006, and so where you see the big spike in unemployment is the last recession, the 2008 recession. And what you can see is that although unemployment went up pretty quickly after the 2008 recession, that wasn't the end of the story, and a lot of the problems, the peaks of these things, actually came quite a few years later. And so in the UK, and particularly for the graduate labour market, we probably think that it took until about 2014 for the recession really to be over. So I think there's one question, which is whether jobs are going up or down on a month-by-month basis, and whether things are looking better, and they definitely are looking better than they were. There's another thing, which is what's the long-term picture look like? Are we in a position where unemployment over the long run might become a bit higher? And nobody knows, but I think there's certainly reason to believe that that might be the case. If we go on to the next slide, I've got some data. So this is from Adzuna, which is a vacancies, jobs board. It's an online jobs board, and so people have got really interested in doing a lot of analysis of these online jobs vacancy data. So it's not a perfect measure of how the economy is doing or how the labour market's doing, but it's actually quite a useful one. So this chart just tells us how many job postings, live job postings, that you could potentially apply for were available over the last year. And what you can see is, with a bit of a wobble in January, pretty much we've seen a steady increase. So after the labour market took a big hit last year, which was not great for the graduate employment market, or for the student employment market, for apprenticeships and so on, actually since then it's been recovering pretty steadily, and it seems to be going in a very definite direction. And there's some data that we've had recently which says that it's actually got back to pre-COVID levels, and that the number of jobs that people are advertising are kind of getting back to where we were. So presumably it will flatten out at some point, because there's a limit to how many jobs people are going to need. But there's some quite good signs on that. So one of the things that we, in terms of talking to young people, we should be really careful not to sort of terrify them. And there are some difficult times around, there are some difficult times coming. Some of those things are particularly difficult for young people, but there are also some good signs from the labour market, and we need to try and balance those messages. Go on and look at the next one. So one of the things that is important to say is that a lot of the figures that I show are things like unemployment, or jobs advertised, or vacancies that graduate recruiters or student recruiters are recruiting to. And that's only part of the story, of course, because if we're talking to young people about careers, we need to talk about quite a lot of other things as well. So we need to talk about how work has been changed by what's happened over the last year. And, some jobs have become, certain jobs, certain sectors have suffered while others have thrived. Understanding those changes in the labour market are really important. But also to recognise that the composition of work has changed and the patterns of work are changing. We're working from home more and more and so on. So if we then think about what's happening specifically for students, we can see that it was a pretty challenging year for student employment. So what I've got here are series that run over a number of years. So the first one is graduate recruitment. And what it says is that last year, graduate recruitment dropped. There were less graduates recruited last year than there were the previous year. But it wasn't the worst. This happens. There's a cycle of these things. It happens from time to time. And periodically, we do see drops in recruitment. This was a bad one, but not the worst. It wasn't as bad as what we saw in 2008, 2009. And where there was a more worrying drop, we haven't got quite as long time series on this, but where there was a more worrying drop was around internships and placement students. And you'll probably feel this was particularly asking about higher education placements, but you'll probably find the same trend when you're talking to employers about work experience. So some employers are finding it more difficult in the current situation with current sort of various different restrictions on their employment. They're finding it more difficult to bring in temporary staff to do placements, or to bring in school students to do a 1 week or a 2 week placement. So there are some challenging things there. If we go on and look at the next slide, we can see that actually we found that last year, also, yeah, I'll just say this. I think it is really important to emphasize that despite the kind of negative pictures that we've seen in relation to work experience, that not all work experience is cancelled. A lot of employers are really keen to carry on doing this, and they're looking for alternative ways to do it. So a lot of them have done things like shift stuff virtually. And there's one of the things we've been talking about quite a lot in ISE is what is a virtual placement, what is a virtual internship, what is virtual work experience. And there's definitely quite a big spectrum out there, ranging from the firms that are saying, actually, we're going to do it as we ever did and bring students in face to face, through to ones that are cancelling it altogether, but an awful lot are somewhere in between. And they might be delivering a short virtual mentoring program. They might be actually delivering exactly the same sorts of work experience they were, but just trying to do it online. So there's all sorts of things. So you have to kind of explore with employers what they're doing, but many employers are still very committed to doing something. So if we move on, what I've done is look at the school and college leaver pattern from last year, and actually school and college leaver hiring held up pretty well last year. Now, I'm not exactly sure why that is, and there were certainly some negative patterns in terms of the numbers of apprenticeships that started and so on. But our members were saying, we're carrying on recruiting, recruiting school leavers, college leavers in roughly the same sort of numbers as we did in the pre-pandemic era. So we'll see how they're going this year. I've got some more figures to show you about where their thinking currently is. But actually, if you're thinking about your students who are going directly into work, either through a school and college leaver program or through an apprenticeship, then those students, actually, there are some positive signs if they're going to work for an ISE member. So if we go on to the next slide, nobody knows what's going to happen at the end of this year. When we went out to employers last September, they were not so optimistic, but actually we went out to them in April and we said, how are you feeling about hiring? Are you going to recruit more or less than people than you did last year? And the biggest proportion said actually about the same. So that's not great news, because overall employment was depressed last year, but actually a bigger proportion said we're going to recruit slightly more, somewhat more, a lot more, than those who said we're going to recruit less. So on balance, we think the market is improving, and we would expect to see growth at the current time, and that depends on all the things that might happen through the summer in terms of COVID and all the rest of it. But at the moment, we think things are on the up. I've talked to you about how generally employment numbers are on the up, and we think that while young people have been bearing a lot of the brunt of the negative impacts of COVID, actually next year we think we'll see some improvements for them. So it's some good messages that you can be conveying to the young people that you're working with. If we go on to the next slide, what I've done is try and compare how it changes, and what we can look at is that this is a analysis of data from last year and then that data I've just shown you. So whereas last year a very large proportion of employers were reducing the number of hires that they were recruiting in each of these different categories. So that's the red block. This year, much fewer are reducing. So I think at the very least we've stopped the shrinkage in the labour market, and so we're seeing it stabilising, and actually then in most cases we're seeing slightly more recruitment next year than people, quite slightly more people growing their recruitment next year than we were last year. So if we go on now, one of the other things that we've been doing recently is we've been polling members, and we've been asking, how do you feel about various things? And so we've got a confidence measure, and it basically goes from sort of very confident if you're at 2, if you're scoring 2, through to very unconfident if you're scoring at -2. And what we can see here is that most people on balance, the mood in the ISE membership is that people believe that their own organisation is growing. And that's a really positive sign for the labour market, because if your own organisation is growing, that's the thing you're most aware of. You've got the best sort of ability to guess how it's all going. And people in April thought it was, on balance, my organisation is growing. And in May, they thought actually they feel a bit more positive that it's likely to grow. COVID, on balance, they think COVID is over. But between April and May, they've got a bit less confident that COVID is over as the numbers have risen. So then we asked 2 other questions. This is our kind of confidence measure. The next one is there enough opportunity for young people? And people say, on balance, no. I mean, they're not strongly saying that. It's not terrible, but on balance, I think there aren't enough opportunities for young people, and that's even gone down a little bit since April. And then, is the economic crisis over? No, on balance, no, but actually people are feeling slightly more positive in May. So these confidence measures are useful because they give us a sense of how key people, I mean, yourselves, you might have responded to it, university careers services, employers, and then a lot of our supplier members who are also all replying to this. It gives us a sense of how people who have all got quite a lot of insights about the labour market are feeling about the labour market. And in general, I would say, we can summarise it by saying people are a bit kind of meh about the whole thing. People don't really know where it's going. Broadly, when you add it all up, people are pretty much in the neither agree nor disagree as their confidence. So we're kind of in a wait and see pattern really on all of these issues. Go on to the next one. So I'll hand back over to Stephen now to talk a bit about skills, but I'm happy at the end to pick up any more questions about that sort of big picture around how the labour market is trending. Thanks.
Thanks, Tristram. Just on that point, actually, we've had a question from Mark. Actually, it's probably worth covering off now. And he just asked actually about the obviously there's a shrinking numbers of shrinking recruitment activity by employers and by sector. But what's the overall impact? Because last year the market was down about 15%. Tristram, have you got a kind of a sense of what the overall picture for vacancies is, up or down compared to pre-pandemic?
So the overall proportion?
Yeah, we're still behind where we were pre-pandemic in terms of actual overall hiring numbers at the moment.
It's really difficult to say, but because at the moment people have not finalised their recruitment for this year. So because the sort of employers' recruitment cycle kind of works on the education timetable. So a lot of things will be getting finalised over the summer and into the early autumn. My guess would be that we went down. So in terms of I mean, as I showed you, in terms of school and college leavers, it's pretty stable. My guess is it'll probably be similar this year, a slight increase in terms of the number of school and college vacancies that our members are recruiting. My guess is that they will recruit more graduates last year. Will they recruit as many as they did in 2019? I'd guess probably not, but we will have figures on that as we go through. We do a big survey in probably September where we really will get a lot more detail on that. But yeah, my guess is that we're heading up very much above where we were last year, but probably not quite back to where we were in 2019.
Great, thanks, Tristram. And it's fair to say that we do employer sector forums where we talk to employers sector by sector, and it's a mixed bag, of course. And but some employers do say, particularly those that are a bit more cyclical, that cut back. Consulting is a good example. You know, when the market suffers, they cut back quite quickly. Then also they expand quite quickly when the market improves. And there are some recruiters who are, you know, actually having to recruit quite fast for September intakes because the business all of a sudden has demand.
I think that's a really important point, because what we've seen is that in COVID, actually even more than in any other recession really, has been a very sectoral experience where some sectors have been doing well and others have been doing badly. And what that means is that you can have, it sort of seems contradictory, but you can have at the same time rising unemployment and skills shortages, because there can be areas where people can't find enough or the right kind of people at the same time as in general unemployment might be going up. And we're definitely seeing that there's definitely some areas. There was an article in the Guardian at the weekend which was talking about skills shortages in the like hospitality and retail and those kind of areas, where a lot of people left over the pandemic, and now as things are picking up, they've got to replace a huge number of people again. So there are definitely opportunities out there if you know where to look.
Cool. Thanks, Tristram. We might come back to some more questions on that later. So yeah, so yes, if you've got any questions, please remember as we go through, please pop them in the chat box, and we will pick those up later. So we're going to talk a little bit about skills now, and actually, what is it that employers look for in terms of skills, and how do they go about recruiting those particular skills? One of the things that actually I get asked quite a lot is, has the pandemic changed, you know, what employers are looking for? And I think it's too early to say. Actually, fundamentally, employers are still recruiting to the same, you know, the same competencies, the same strengths, the same abilities that they were pre-pandemic, because they put a lot of time and resources into understanding what their organizations need. And but I think in time there might be some drift, as there was after the financial crash, where words like resilience, self-awareness became much more common in the language of recruiters. We might see that emphasized even more, you know, depending on the impact of remote working, etc., etc. But one of the first things I wanted to say, so actually the UK recruitment market is quite different to almost any other early talent graduate market, student market around the world. And that's that most employers in the UK actually don't recruit by subject discipline. Which may sound a little bit strange actually to some of you, but it's true. I mean, to be a lawyer, you don't need to do a law degree. Before I took this job 8 years ago, I used to head up student recruitment for Ernst & Young, and actually, yeah, we didn't. 40% of the intake would have a qualification that was not relevant to the world of business, accountancy, finance, etc. And that's a great thing in some ways, because it means that actually, and people going through education actually can keep their options open. You know, they don't have to necessarily actually be driven by what it is that they do study. So we always recommend that actually people do study subjects that they enjoy, subjects they're going to do well at, but also with an eye to kind of those subjects that employers that do look for as benchmarks. Now that's not, so that's not every employer, because you know, there are those 20% of employers that do recruit by discipline. You know, you can't be an engineer without engineering qualifications, etc., etc. So I wouldn't say it's the same for everybody, but it is very much a feature of the UK market, this generalist nature. So if employers aren't necessarily focusing on actually what somebody studied, what is it that they are looking for? And that's where we get into the realm of the knowledge, skills and abilities that employers need as well. So employers will look at academics, probably less so nowadays than they used to, for reasons of diversity, having to increase talent pools. So, you know, some of those benchmarks around, if I go back to when I started 20 years ago, actually, you know, you needed 2 A's and a B at A level to progress into the organization. Lots of organizations don't have those kind of minimum qualifications now, but that doesn't mean that they don't look at academics. I wouldn't like to give the impression to students, pupils out there that academics aren't important. They are, but it's definitely not the be all and end all in terms of recruitment. So actually, what does it mean, this knowledge, skills and abilities piece that employers do recruit for? And that's what I want to go into a little bit now. But as I said at the start, there are a whole number of different routes into work now than there used to be. As I said, in the kind of employers that we deal with, the structured end of early talent, you know, those that do formalized training programs, I think it's fair to say that over 20 years ago, actually most of the effort was focused on graduates, but now that's very different. Apprentice routes, school leaver routes, degree apprenticeships, there's a whole plethora of different ways into that first career and into jobs. And I thought to demonstrate this, I'd talk about accountancy, because it's the area that that I know through my professional life. So, but you could replicate this in different ways for different sectors. But this is a good example about how people can enter the accountancy profession by different routes. So even the traditional route of going in through university, that does have different options within that stream. As I mentioned, you can do any degree, and accountancy firms will still look at you, still hire you. The qualification still takes the same amount of time to get through, whether you have an accountancy and finance degree or not, although you might get exceptions. So you could do any degree. Also, though, I mean, accountancy firms do recruit students with accounting degree, so you could do that specialist degree, and then actually that could give you some exemptions, when you start your training contract. And also there are a number of sponsored degrees out there where accountancy professional services firms have partnered with university and are co-developing degree qualifications, whereby actually the student does part of their professional qualifications as part of their course. There'll also be work placements embedded in those. I was involved in one of these programs, and two actually, at Lancaster and Newcastle. And actually, if all goes well, those do again result in a job with the sponsoring firm. So those would be the options through a university route. Now, the routes that have really come on stream over the last few years are the routes directly into work. So that is where employers are typically recruiting people once they finish their A-level stage qualifications. And actually, those are the apprentice routes. It does get a little bit complicated with apprenticeships, because also actually graduates often join organisations are going on to what is technically an apprentice route, because that's the way that a lot of the training is constructed now. But we'll end up having a whole day-long session on apprentice training routes if we go down that rabbit hole. But actually, yes, there are lots of employers out there who are offering apprentice routes for people once they finish their A-level stage. Also, training contracts still exist, because once you get into the minutiae of different training qualifications and different routes through, some of those training routes don't necessarily form part of an apprentice model. The key difference between those routes is, are you a student first or an employee first? And with the university route, you're predominantly a student first, whereas actually with the work routes, you're an employee first. So actually that has all sorts of implications for student fees, tuition fees, etc. The work apprentice routes, actually, they don't normally have fees attached. So actually the earn while you learn phrase applies to those. Now, as I said at the start, the reason I've used that as an example is to give you an idea of the different range of routes that are available out there, which does make the landscape a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult to navigate, which is why we as an organisation have consistently emphasised the importance of careers in school, of investment in careers in school, so that actually we can give young people the advice and guidance that they need. But if you looked at the tech sector, if you looked at the legal sector, if you looked at a whole range of other different sectors, you will see similar kind of maps of through to careers. So those are the kind of employers we deal with, and those are the routes that they recruit for. But that skills piece that I started with, actually that knowledge, skills, ability piece, this is where we do get some consistency across all employers and different sectors. There's a problem sometimes that we overgeneralize about student recruitment, but actually I think when we talk about skills, actually we can talk about consistencies between employers. So I've got this set of images up on the screen just to talk through some of what are the most common skills that we find at employers that that are key when they're recruiting students. The first image really is talking about teamwork. And I'll come on to this a little bit later. Teamwork, I think, often gets a little bit misunderstood, and that people with limited experience of work thinking, oh, well, this is all about just getting on well, working in a group, and everybody being able to get on quite nicely. And of course, that is important. It's important that teams do gel and work collectively. But I'm sure, as all of you listening into this know, that work is never that smooth. So actually, it's about getting stuff done with people. It's about dealing with the difficulties, conflicts, dealing with different resources, and it's about actually delivering something at the end of the day. It's how working through other people. I mean, I think the days when actually people did sort of sit in a little isolated booth, working on projects, not having to deal with other people is those days are long gone in pretty much all sectors of work. So that teamwork, that working with people is really important. The scratching the head image, that's about problem solving. The reason that our employers invest in early talent, the reason they develop training programs is because they want to develop their talent of the future. They want to develop people that are going to grow within their organizations, whether they're public or private sector, commercial or non-commercial. A lot of that is to do with actually dealing with problems, dealing with the challenges of work. So they're looking to recruit smart, intelligent people, but who can apply that way of thinking, that problem solving, into real world examples. The theoretical thinker who can't understand actually the core of a problem and an issue and can't come up with solutions isn't much use to many employers. The microphone is about communication. That's not saying that employers expect their student hires to be able to stand on a stage, and talk to thousands of people, but it is that ability to communicate, linked to problem solving, linked to working with people. If you can't talk to other people, if you can't listen, if you can't understand what your client needs, if I go back to my previous organisation, you've got to understand what the client needs. You've got to be able to solve their issues, and you've got to be able to communicate it back. So without that communication, it's very, very different. The clock is about, I mean, obviously getting to work on time is important, but it's more about organisation skills. And I think in this very agile world that we live in, this fast pace of change, actually I see lots of employers talking about project management skills, people who can actually deal with ambiguity, deal with lots of conflicting constraints, but actually ultimately still get something delivered on time, get those solutions out in a meaningful way. So Nest of the Skills organization, they talk about this, about combining project management skills and creativity skills as being a very potent mix for the future. The rock climber, that's talking about risk really, and attitudes to risk. Some employers tell us that their student hires actually they're more risk averse than they think they would have been, in years gone by. I think that's sometimes because the pressure to get really good exam results, to do well academically, and also the way that education is measured. Whether a student goes for the A star or whether they go for a first at university, that's still how they're measured. Whereas again, as we all know through the world of work, the best answer is not always the perfect Rolls-Royce answer. It's being able to deal with different constraints and different demands and come up with what's an effective solution, and also being able to deal with the fact that things go wrong all the time, every day, and being comfortable with that. If you look at the way a lot of technology and a lot of products are developed now, lots of products are developed on the go once they're launched. I mean, we all get frustrated with software. You see this going wrong with the Samsung phone that caught fire, but lots of products are iterated on the go. So that being able to deal with the risk, being able to cope when something doesn't quite go as planned and recover quickly is important. And the final comments about technical skills. I think one of the challenges of people with limited experience of work once they do join the workplace is employers sometimes make this mistake of thinking actually, well, this generation is totally tech savvy. They're really at one with technology, and in some ways they are. But of course, work technology is often quite different to social media technology, to app technology. So there's some of that being able to adapt to workplace technology. There's also the importance of data in so many roles now. Now that doesn't mean that everybody has to be a data geek, but if I take, my profession, we work in what is really the HR space. And I think there's always been a bit of a challenge sometimes, whereas HR people don't really like numbers, but you have to know, every walk of life, everything we do, a lot of solutions are driven by the data that's out there. So being comfortable with technology and being comfortable with data analysis, I think, is something that everybody needs at a relatively base level. And those are the consistent messages that we get from employers. Tristram mentioned the surveys he does. Every year we do one of our core pieces of work is the development survey that comes out roughly around springtime every year, early spring. When you go onto our website and log in, you'll see previous reports, so you can get a lot more detail on this. And there's some really interesting stuff in there around the attributes that employers are looking for at a school leaver level, but also actually where they say that actually maybe that students could do better, where actually there's a bit of a mismatch between the skills they expect and actually what they're seeing on the ground. I mean, one of the arguments that we tend to avoid is this whole slightly tabloid argument around, oh, employers aren't happy with the skills again. Over 80% of the employers we work with are happy with the skills that they get when they're hiring students. They invest in recruitment, they invest in training, and they understand the talent pool they're fishing in. But that doesn't mean there are areas where actually we can get these transitions working better, and the link between education and employers. So this is one of the ways that actually that Tristram and his work has broken up actually those skills that students need. So there are the attitude and behavioural aspects. There are the technical skills, some of which are generic across all employers, but some of them will be specific. If you do want to go into a numerate discipline, if you do want to go into a highly technical discipline, if you want to be an engineer, there are some technical skills that you do need to think about. Law, as an example, good written skills, good language skills are essential to that profession. There's also this idea of transferable skills. And I think this is something that, again, particularly with students, they often don't understand some of the skills they develop through volunteering, through part-time work. Actually, those are exactly the kind of things employers want to talk about, because employers know that students haven't got necessarily direct relevant work experience that they can tap into. So they're looking from evidence from other things that young people may have done that will transfer into the workplace. And then what do those mean for specific workplace skills that people do need that are focused on the world of work? So this is some work we did. As I said, we do ask employers actually, what are the areas where they think there could be improvements, where students, what would make a student more likely to get that job when they apply if they can prove these skills? So under that, workplace skills. Now, we're not saying that employers expect inexperienced people to be able to deal with conflict, at a detailed level, highly competent negotiators and influencers. But actually, there's something about giving work experience to young people that actually helps them understand what these concepts are. So that actually, as they do transition into a career, they know actually where they're going to need to develop their skills and where they're going to need to grow. Technical skills, data handling and analysis, I've talked about that. It's that being comfortable with data, being able to look at data, understand what it means, and actually being able to interpret that, and actually also understanding the limitations of data. As we all know, data will only take you so far, doesn't always provide the specific answer. And then this transferable piece, this presentation skills piece, again, that's something employers would like to see people more confident at communicating. As I said, being able to understand actually the issues from somebody else's point of view, maybe from a client, and being able to present back to those audiences. Again, if you go into our development report, you'll see that detailed with quite a few more specifics, so you can go into that a bit more detail. But I do like to try and simplify this, because sometimes the language of skills can get in the way. There are a plethora of different skills frameworks out there. Employers all use slightly different languages. You might use different frameworks within your school, so it does get a little bit confusing. I think it gets confusing for us, let alone the poor students trying to navigate it. So how would I put this more simply? And actually, I've kind of I've bastardized a bit of a phrase that one of the partners I used to work with used to use when he used to sum this up, what he was looking for. So that teamwork piece, that importance of being able to work with people and fundamentally get things done with and through other people. This practical intelligence, it's not just about theoretical answers, it's being able to solve, real world problems actually in a working environment, think through problems clearly and deliver good solutions. This keenness for this chosen career path, and I do think this is a bit of a tricky one, because I've talked about the general nature of the market. So there's a real plus point with that, which is that actually people have lots of options that they can pursue. But then actually, you can get the paralysis of choice in terms of, well, how do you choose what you do want to do? How do you start to narrow that down? And again, that's very much where I think that we all have a role to play in that. But it is important that actually when people are going for a job, they have to be able to demonstrate that actually they have thought through actually what that role involves. They have got a level of self-awareness, so they see where their skills and interests and abilities do match to that role. Because if an employer is looking at choosing between two candidates, they want to invest in the person that they think is going to be the most likely to succeed. Employers are investing in potential. They're investing in people who are on an upward trajectory. So that interest and understanding of a job. If I go back to my old interviewing days at EY, I used to ask about business stories, what people had read in the business press. Not because I wanted a detailed analysis from the FT, but I kind of had the view that, well, you're saying you're going to work in a commercial business environment, but if you're not really that interested in what's happening in the business world, well, where's the evidence that actually you're going to enjoy doing this work? And this comes back to my final point, actually that resilience piece. We all know that the world of work is difficult. We all know that every job can be dull. And actually, the people that are successful, particularly in the early stages of those careers, are that understanding of that they will be on a learning curve. That not all job is thoroughly exciting every moment of time. They will have maybe down days, and it's who can still plow through on a wet, rainy, wintry morning. And that's where the resilience piece comes in that employers are looking for. So how can young people develop those skills? It is a bit of a challenge with COVID. We accept that. One of the things that we're are pushing employers to do is to keep, making available opportunities for young people. If any of you've seen the Bright Networks internship program, that's launched again. That's where employers are offering, free online internship-based type activities to all. There is an age limit. I think it's over 18. For people to participate, but it's unlimited in terms of hires. There are employers that are able to do internships and placements online, but actually, if young people can't get those kind of opportunities, there are other things they can do to get those skills. There are never as many, internship places as there are student jobs. That's always been a factor in the market because of resources. But it's that volunteering stuff. It's that part-time work, and also actually ensuring that students do that reflection, get an understanding of what they're good at, what they enjoy, asking who can they talk to get some guidance, who do they know that might be in a field that they are interested, so they can understand their options. And also that practicing online recruitment, that's something that people can very much do now because the world has changed in online recruitment, which I'll come on to. So it's actually being able to practice that and develop those skills online. So when they do hit the selection process, actually they're as much prepared as they can be. I think sometimes students think employers are trying to trick people when they come through a selection process. They're actively, trying to reject as many people as they can. To be honest with you, although employers do have a huge surplus of applications in many areas, not all, but in many, actually they want to recruit people. Saying no to somebody actually is a big waste of time and resources. So actually, the good employers do put quite a bit of time into explaining their selection processes. So it's important again to research those. So I sometimes do some presentations based at schools and students, and I always include this slide when I'm talking to them, and it's just getting over these two key points, that reflection piece, that examination piece, doing something, reflecting on it, learning, thinking how you might do it differently. Really important skill to embed in young people, because as we talk about the future of work, we all know that careers aren't linear anymore. The world is much more fluid. So actually that being able to self-analyze, be self-aware, also makes people good lifelong learners, so they will continue to develop in the world of work. And also this risk piece, again, it is a common theme from employers that it's either perfectionism or nervousness around things going wrong. But actually, when I used to interview people, you get the perfect candidate where everything's gone well, and if I'd ask them and say, well, tell me about a time when when something didn't go well, and if they couldn't answer the question, I think, well, either you're not telling the truth because we very rarely has a perfect life, or you've not pushed yourself, neither of which are great examples. So that's a skills piece, just a little bit around actually what are the selection processes that our employers using. And one of the things that's changed over, I would say, the last 10 years is the use of technology in recruitment. There's a lot more testing that's done up front now. Technology has enabled that. And also, as I said, as employers place a bit less focus on specific academic qualifications as a pass or fail stage. At the application stage, actually they put some form of testing online there. So that's things like psychometric tests, situational judgment tests, a whole range of different tools. But the basic process is still the same, that somebody will make an application, they will go through a form of testing, they will do a first interview, which is more and more often done via an interviewing platform online now. And then they will do an assessment centre at the final stage. Of course, the big change through COVID has been those assessment centres being run online. Lots of employers have learned how to do assessment centres, group exercises, using tools like Zoom, etc. Doing case studies, presentations, even doing role play exercises. Some employers do. We'll have to see what happens with that. My view is that actually quite a bit of that will stay online. It is more efficient to do it online. People don't have to travel so much, both candidates and employers. Getting a whole suite of meeting rooms can be challenging if you're an employer. So I think the face-to-face will come back because it's really important that those relationships are developed. But I think it'll be interesting to see how much actual recruitment activity stays online, and then where the point of when the virtual piece will happen. So in summary, increased use of web-based interviews, either in real time or video interview platforms. That's where the candidate records their answers and the recruiters look at it differently. More online assessment tools included in the recruitment process now, and I think that again is going to continue. The use of web tools to deliver modified assessment center exercises. I think employers they did a lot of significant changes last year. They're now thinking about, well, actually, what of this do we keep, and what different platforms might we use to do that? Using tools and other activities to run things online. And of course, that replicates the world of work, because there's we won't get into the ongoing debate about remote working and how many employers will keep employees at home, how much will happen in the office. But it is going to be a more common feature that people are using things like Zooms and Teams actually in the workplace. So there is that replication piece, and that's as much as possible what employers are trying to do. They're trying to replicate actually the reality of work and the skills they need, and find fair ways to assess those through a selection process. So that actually it's not just about testing whether somebody's got the skills, it's also giving candidates the chance to understand actually, well, am I right for this job? Have I got the skills that this role or career may need? I won't go into the details on this. We can send the slides round afterwards with a follow-up email. But this is around actually what's happening face-to-face, what's happening blended, and what's online. There's still an element of people being unsure. Most employers we talk to are still planning for a virtual year. When it comes to summer internship programs and work experiences, when it comes to onboarding, and when it comes to attraction activities in the autumn, I think because of the levels of uncertainty and the need to start planning now, employers are very much virtual first, but then looking for the opportunities to do some of that blended, with maybe some possibilities of some face-to-face activities a bit later in the year. But again, that's something we'll keep track on, as the pandemic continues. So that's Tristram's contact details. You'll also find mine on our website, so please feel free to get in touch with us. But I guess now it's time for any questions. I haven't seen any more come through on the question dialogue box yet, but if you do want to ask something on what we've covered, please do type something in. Tristram, do you think there's anything that we haven't covered that we should have done over the last sort of 55 minutes?
No, I think just the only thing that it's worth saying is that in the conversations we've had with employers, a lot of them are looking for ideas about the best way to engage with you. And because a lot of the old ways that we used to do it are not really working very well at the moment. And so if you've got an idea about how you want an employer to engage with your school, then absolutely, you know, I would get in touch with them and propose it to them, because I think they're hoping that people will come up with ways that are not just you know, shifting the old face-to-face stuff online, but actually, you know, new ways for you to engage with students.
There are actually a couple of questions coming through now, so we've got 5 minutes before we're due to finish. So I'm just looking at some that have come through from John. I have to apologise because we're trying to read the questions actually as we're answering them live. So first question from John's got a couple of questions. So has there been a noticeable difference about how employers recruit school leavers? I think there's been it's always been a challenge for employers, and employers have learned that actually you can't just use graduate recruitment tools and techniques in the school leaver market, because different in ages, different experiences, etc., etc. But they do tend to be a modification of that process with different benchmarks. So they might use sort of different exercises. Some of those exercises might be slightly simplified versions, but still underline the same core principles in terms of abilities that they're looking for. And one of the things I didn't mention that I should have done actually is that when employers are recruiting in our world, I would say most of their school leaver apprentice type opportunities, the career trajectories are the same as graduates. It's different routes to get to the same place. That gives employers more flexibility. It gives them a greater talent pool to call on. But these aren't, you know, poorer relation type opportunities. Therefore, the core underpinning skills and things they're looking for are the same. Would you agree with that, Tristram?
Yeah, I mean, definitely some firms actually have a formal thing where school leavers will effectively come onto the graduate program after a certain number of years, and a lot of firms will deal with the whole cohort together rather than separating them out. I mean, it varies, and you'll find different approaches, but yeah, in some of the kind of best firms, they see it as two routes to the same place.
John's also got a question on timing, Tristram, about when actually employers recruit, you know, school leavers in the cycle. Does it vary much from employer to employer? Is it do they do it at different times to maybe their other graduate recruitment?
Yeah, there is a table on that in the recruitment survey. So if you have a look on the recruitment survey, we've got some information, and I mean, there's sort of the main thing really is that it's a bit less structured than the graduate recruitment. So a lot of employers who are recruiting apprentices are recruiting them not just, say, at one point in each year, but they're recruiting them through the year. So you tend to get, you know, which can be difficult for you because you want students to finish school, not to suddenly disappear. But it may be that you want to start applying, and people might be starting as soon as their GCSEs are finished or whatever. So, I mean, in general, it does still follow the academic year as a pattern, but I think you've got much more of an ongoing rolling recruitment approach with apprentices and school and college leavers.
Yeah, I think we found last year that apprentice vacancies initially in the pandemic seemed to be hit harder than graduate vacancies, but I know we had a conversation around, was that because actually employers sometimes recruit apprentices a bit later in the cycle, you know, after UCAS forms and things have been done. So it wasn't necessarily a question of reducing vacancies; they just stopped hiring in March, which I think indicated that there's an element they might go a bit later in the cycle. Well, we're at 29 minutes past, so, and I think actually my laptop computer's slightly slow by about a minute or so, so I think we should probably call it time there. I'm sure everybody's got you know, full and busy days to get on with. So thanks for joining the session. As I said, this is our first specific you know, market update that we've done aimed at those of you based in schools and colleges. So please give us some feedback. We've had a few comments saying thank you very much, so that's good to hear. Anything that you want to hear more about, please do let us know. If you've got any follow-up questions for myself and Tristram and the rest of the team, please do. And please do use that knowledge hub. I know it's difficult to find time in the day sometimes to get some time for to actually just do a bit of research, but those reports that Tristram's mentioned, there's lots of really good detail in there that will help you really understand the opportunities that are out there and help you provide good advice and guidance to your students. So thank you very much. That's all from us. Have a good day, everybody.